life consists of many levels. Here's my physical body, which is sitting on a chair, an old man's body. And then there's my mind, what most people call the mind, the activity going on up here. But I'm sitting in this church, and this church is full of silence, isn't it? There's a sort of invisible background of silence. So if I was a little fish, this silence would be the ocean, wouldn't it? I'm swimming around in this ocean of silence. And if you were to address this question to the silence and say, "How are you this morning?" it would seem a bit silly, wouldn't it? The silence is silence, it's unchanging. Or stillness. Or even ask of the furniture, the old pews here. "How are you today?" It's meaningless, isn't it? And here in the middle of it all, we find this thing we call man, who's here today and gone tomorrow, always changing up and down. Unhappy one day, happy the next. Nothing's ever the same. Well, some of us in life, we start thinking, what's it all about? What are we? What is man? I did as a young man. And so I gradually came to realize that I could observe my body and my thoughts from, as it were, outside. It's not so difficult, you know. It's very easy to observe your hand, isn't it? Your body. You see it, just look at it. We look at ourselves in the mirror, don't we, every day? It takes a bit more tricky to observe the mind, but it can be done. You begin to sort of realize that this ever-changing performance isn't really what I am. It's just a sort of almost mechanical, robotic sort of reaction to the world around me. And certainly not something to be relied on or paid much attention to. So these questions, how are you, which has become such a habit in our present day society, I find slightly irritating because they pull me back into a world I've left behind, a sort of childishness. It's like asking a grown man about some, something that he did in the nursery. I've grown out of it, dear. You will too one day. Well, that's what this life is for, my dear. To find what real life is, life with a capital L and capital IFE too, real life. Not this sort of half-baked little thing we call life down here, which is little more than a robot, a puppet, just at the mercy of circumstances, here today and gone tomorrow. Feeling. How do you feel? You see how the question is so too small, dear. It's just too small. It's not it. It's not a real question. That's why it annoys me and I don't answer it. There you are. You've got an answer to your first question now, haven't you? Long way round, but we've got there eventually. So you meet lots and lots of opposition in this life, particularly from your nearest and dearest, your parents who think you should be responsible and make money and have a family and do everything according to convention. Well, those of us who take the unconventional path have many difficulties. It's much easier to be the same as everybody else. But that seems like being in prison. And some people just can't bear it. They have to go their own way. Well, to do that, you need courage, dear. Because it can be very frightening. I've got no easy answer, dear, how to cope with this life. Look at me now, I've got troubles with my own body. I don't know how. I have to learning all the time how to cope with it. I can't stand up properly. I always have to be holding on to something for support. I can't put my trousers on without having to sit down or lean against a wall or something so I don't fall over. We're learning all the time how to cope with life. It's difficult sometimes. It's almost always difficult. Well, our body has a temporary use, but only very temporary, isn't it? When I look back over my long life, it all seems almost nothing. It just seems rather like a dream. I've woken up from the dream. I mean, it seemed terribly important when I was living it, like a dream does. But when you wake up in the morning, the dream rather evaporates, doesn't it? So what's it for? What is the worth of life, or at least of our mortal life? Well, it's a school, really. Why do we find ourselves in such a strange position when instinctively we know there's something missing? Why do we all yearn for what seems unattainable? Perfect love, perfect freedom. We don't want to die, do we? Look at the fuss people make about this virus, for example. People don't want to die, do they? They'll go to great lengths to try to stop themselves dying, as if anybody's ever stopped themselves dying. All we can do is postpone the day. Save yourself today to die tomorrow. But so people have always reached for the stars, haven't they, really? Search for something greater than this life. So maybe that's the purpose of life, too. Search for the stars, my dear. Search for the ultimate. Search for perfection. Search for the love that never says no. For the door that never closes. Search for what your heart longs for. That's really the answer, dear. That's right. Follow your heart. That's what I did as a young man. If you'd asked me that question as a young man, I'd have said, what's this life for? To love and be loved. I thought that was the purpose of life. Then I'd have added freedom, to find freedom. I wasn't too sure what that meant then. And now I'm an old man, I might give much the same answer, I suppose. But of course the whole thing has expanded enormously. Because this life is so limited, isn't it? Look at my, I can have to walk with sticks now. I can only just sort of creep along. I can do very little. I lost most of my strength, my young man's strength. And yet, what happens when we go beyond this life? The infinite reaches out all around us, doesn't it? We are called to the infinite, the infinite. We are called from the finite to the infinite. From that which fails to that which faileth not. From mortality to immortality. From the small little me to the infinite greatness. What can I do in this life? Little me. Of course, when I was a young man with strong muscles, I thought I could help the world. As a young farmer, I could do things on my little square of land. Seemed quite funny to me looking back. I suppose because as I've worked more in spirit, I've come into the infinitely greater work of prayer. What do I mean by prayer? Prayer is the raising of consciousness, the raising and expansion of how one sees life. From just what's in it for me, this little thing here, what's in it for me, a good meal and a hug and a kiss, to beyond the stars. What even the stars will do now, beyond the stars. Often the first requirement is just to stop talking, listen. That's why it's so important to listen. There are few things in life more important than just listening. You can hear the raindrops, can't you? In the distant traffic. And isn't it beautiful? It's so beautiful you want to cry, don't you? Because those tears are the language of the heart, aren't they? In spiritual talk, when you get beyond understanding and start functioning from the heart, you see, then you come into another level of communication and heart altogether. It's wonderful, isn't it, how tears, they say that tears purify, they're clean, they clean our perception, clean our understanding, purify the heart. Well, I think that's a wonderful thing. Nothing better. If you can encourage people to, well, everybody is listening. They're all listening to loud music, most of them, on their phones, aren't they? Well, I suppose that's the beginning of it. But of course, there is more and more to listening. So I suggest that you turn the noise down a bit and then listen, because you can always listen beyond. That's a very important word, to listen beyond, you see. Listening can stretch out infinitely. And even the noisiest noise, you can listen beyond it into the silence. It's an extraordinary fact, but you can. You can stand in a busy street in the middle of a city and listen to silence. You can stand there in a pop concert and listen to silence. You know what I mean, don't you? Or a noisy party, listen to silence. It's the most wonderful thing, and you'll find that silence is very welcoming, all embracing. And silence, as you see, is really the beginning of this journey, as I describe. Because although it seems nothing to start with, it expands into everything. So I commend very much to anyone listening the practice of silence. Discover the great comfort of not talking and of not knowing either. It's when we stop trying to know everything that we open the doors, open possibilities to what is beyond knowledge, the infinite, beyond questions. Listening here, just being here, listening to the wind as it sounds in the church roof. Maybe that's the voice of angels. I like to think of angels as those that do the will of God. I like to think of animals and trees and plants as angels, flowers, as the clouds, as the wind, the sun. I think of all these things are angels. The main demon in this world is me, I, me or mine, because see this, what we call the ego, this is what, when we turn away from this infinite, because in the infinite there's no division, is there? There's no two, it's just one infinite being. When we turn away into this, we all become separate. I want this and you want that. I like this and you like that. I think this should be done and you think I think that should be done. Now, this is all the work of what's called the ego, the I, or the me, or the mine. And if you watch your speech, if you say, you ask how I am, and I say, I am not very well today, that's me, isn't it? That's my separate existence, which is not really what I am. This is the separated me, which has turned from the light of one into the multitudes of many. So this is really the demon, the demonic world. You can say the ego is the devil, chief of the demons. That's why unselfishness is much better than selfishness in this life. Because when we're unselfish, the ego is less important than what you're working at. And when you just put the ego aside and just deal with what's given to you to do, just live in the present. Just blow as the wind blows, just like a tree does. Learn from nature. Just watch how the leaves move to the movement of the wind. Or when the sun shines in the spring, everything starts growing and dies down at this time of year. How the birds fly. Notice these things. And then you might begin to understand what's meant by doing the will of God, which is angelic. You know, the trees don't say, oh, I don't want to blow with the wind today. They just accept, like the grass does. Oh dear. So, my dears, anybody who's listening, take courage and start off on the long journey of spiritual awakening. Learn to meditate. That's all I've done, just practice meditation twice a day since I was a young man. And gradually see you let go the little me, gradually open up, eventually find this, and then you're home. And then you begin to see what life is for, what it's all about, what real work is. We all want to make the world a better place, and life a worthier thing. This is the way.